At my younger brother's promotion party, held at a five-star hotel in Miami Beach, my father stood in front of 200 guests and called me a failure, right as the CEO of the company walked in and said, "Mr. Parker, we need to talk." My name is Ethan Parker, and never, not in a million years, did I think anyone would call me Mr. Especially not on the same night my own father looked me dead in the eye and called me the disgrace of this family, right there in front of hundreds of guests, right in the middle of a celebration honoring the golden boy he loved more than life itself. But life has a strange way of flipping the script, and that night, it flipped hard. The party was hosted at the Grand Astoria, one of the most luxurious hotels on the Miami Beach shoreline. Waiters were pouring champagne by hand, violins playing in the background, tailored suits everywhere, patent leather shoes shining like mirrors. They didn't exactly invite me, of course not. I was merely informed, like someone sending a storm warning, and hoping it wouldn't ruin the view. I showed up anyway. Not for my dad, not for my mom, and definitely not for my perfect little brother, the one they keep featuring in the company newsletter. I came for my son, Mason, and maybe, just maybe, for myself. I didn't come to make a scene. I didn't need apologies. I didn't want their recognition. I just wanted Mason to see his father standing tall, head high, not the family punchline. But the moment I stepped in, my dad looked at me like I was a stain on the red carpet. "What the hell? What is he doing here?" he barked at my mom. I was only a few steps away. Mason grabbed my hand and squeezed it a little tighter. I bent down to reassure him, but inside, it hit me. A tidal wave of old memories, shame, silence, dismissal. Then minutes later, just as my father geared up for another round of public humiliation, the CEO of the entire corporation walked in. He scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and said in a formal, steady voice, "Mr. Parker, we need a word regarding Q3 performance and system integration strategy." The whole room froze, and me? I just nodded, cool and calm, like I'd rehearsed it for 15 years. "I was hoping you'd show up right on time." 3 days before that night, I got a call from my mother. Her name flashed on the screen. Mom. Familiar, but never comforting. My stomach tensed up on reflex, because after all these years, I'd learned one thing. When Mom calls, it's never just to check in. It's a summons, a reminder, a soft but surgical way of saying, "You're still the failure in this family." I let it ring twice, not because I hesitated, but because that tiny pause was my way of keeping some control. A small breath before walking into the same play, on the same stage, with the same roles. "Ethan, sweetheart, how are you?" Her voice was gentle, like she was afraid saying the wrong thing might shatter glass. I kept my tone as neutral as I could. "I'm fine. What's going on, Mom?" She held on to that soft voice, but I could hear the tension under every word. Nobody calls just to be nice. Not her. "Well, here's the thing. Dylan, your brother, he just got promoted. Vice President of the Southern Region. Your father's over the moon. The family's throwing a party this Saturday. Grand Astoria." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Of course, Dylan got promoted. He always colored inside the lines, said the right things, stood in the right place, usually right next to our dad. "Good for him," I said. And I meant it. No bitterness. Just a strange kind of amusement, because even at 45, I was still the misaligned shadow. She paused, then switched to her real voice. "The point. I just wanted you to know. Not inviting you, just informing. There'll be a lot of important people. Your father's boss, too. So, if you decide to come, maybe wear something nice. And Ethan, please don't cause a scene. This night is for Dylan. Don't cause a scene." I almost laughed. Since walking out of that house at 20, I've never caused a scene. I just didn't fit, didn't wear the right suits, didn't shake hands the way they liked, didn't nod at hollow words, and that, in their eyes, made me embarrassing. "I'll think about it, Mom." "Okay, whatever you feel is right. I just hope you understand. Some things can't be changed." I hung up. Didn't say another word. Not angry, just empty. Then I turned around and saw Mason at the dining table doing his homework. He was frowning, counting on his fingers. When he noticed me, he looked up. "Dad, what's 7 times 8? 56. "Thanks, Dad." I smiled. And right there, right in that tiny moment, I knew if I didn't go, if I didn't show my son what it looks like to stand up to your past, then I'd teach him to repeat mine. I wasn't going to let that happen. I left home when I was 20, but the truth is, I was thrown out. Back then, I was a sophomore at the University of Texas in Arlington, majoring in computer science. The first in my family to go into tech, and also the first to make my father so angry. He shattered the family photo hanging in our living room. It was a weekend visit. I'd come home to tell him I had made a decision. I wasn't going to join Parker & Sons, the family construction business. I knew he'd be upset, but I didn't expect him to lose his mind. "So, you want to be some kind of programmer now?" he barked, his face flushed red. "I'm not just thinking about it. I am doing it. I'm good at it. And I want to build something that's mine." "Build what, huh? Sitting on your damn computer all day like a lunatic while your grandfather bled for this company, while I've broken my back to keep the Parker name alive?" I stood in the middle of the living room, fists clenched, heart pounding. I couldn't even look at my mother. She was standing by the stairs, gripping the banister, lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. "Dad, I'm not disrespecting the business, but times have changed. The world needs tech. I want to build the future with code, not bricks." I thought that line sounded smart, but to him, it was a slap in the face. "Then go build it with your damn laptop," he roared, and with zero warning, he kicked my small suitcase down the porch steps. The zipper burst open. Books and clothes scattered. A photo of me and my grandmother hit the ground, frame shattered. I froze. "Don't come back. You're not my son. I didn't raise a tradition-breaking disappointment." I turned to my mom, hoping, praying, begging for just one word. If she had said, "Enough," or even, "Ethan's still our son," I would have stayed. But she said nothing, not a word, not a step forward, just tear-filled eyes and a white-knuckled grip on the railing, like she was holding on to something too fragile to name. So I walked out, didn't look back. I had exactly $237 in my pocket and a library card. I crashed on a friend's couch for a month, worked night shifts at a diner, went to class during the day, and started a new life. No family, no safety net, no home to go back to. Sometimes I still wonder, did my father ever regret it? But deep down, I know the answer. To him, I died the day I chose a keyboard over a trowel. 3 years after the night I was kicked out, I'd tasted the full bitterness of life. No money, no family to lean on. I bounced from place to place, crashing on couches, curled up in back storage rooms after late-night shifts. There was a time I even snuck into the campus library just to sleep, pretending to be a student pulling an all-nighter, anything to avoid freezing outside when temps dropped below 40 degrees. By day, I went to class. By night, I washed dishes at a 24-hour diner. Every time the drain backed up, I'd crouch down, reach deep into the pipes, and spray out clumps of congealed grease. The slimy feel stuck to my fingers long after I scrubbed them. I'd come home, rinse off half-heartedly, and pass out on a sofa that reeked of bleach and sweat. I used to be a kid who loved books, loved creating. But at that point in my life, I was just a machine, grinding to survive. Then came a warehouse gig down in South Houston. Night shifts, loading, checking, stacking boxes, some nearly 50 pounds, onto metal shelves. Most nights, it was just me and a half-broken radio crackling in the corner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cracked concrete under my boots, forklifts clanking in the distance. I called it my second school, the place I learned to stay quiet and endure. One morning, after a shift, I walked into a tiny roadside coffee shop. The sky was still half dark. My eyes were bloodshot. My jacket was frayed. My hands covered in paper-cut scars. That's when I met Natalie, the woman who would one day become my wife. She was a barista there. Like me, Natalie belonged to the world of early shifts and faded dreams tucked into jacket pockets. But she still had something I'd lost long ago, kindness in her eyes. At first, we just made small talk. A week later, she knew I was juggling 2 jobs while studying programming. A month later, she showed up with a lunchbox, cold sandwich, and a sticky note that read, "Eat. You look like a ghost." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. We fell in love. Not the candlelight and roses kind, but the kind built by 2 exhausted souls holding hands through the dark. She moved in with me, a tiny room we rented by the week. We split everything, every dollar, every loaf of bread, every blurry evening watching antenna TV on a busted old set. And then Mason was born. The first time I held my son, I thought, This is why I'm still here. He was tiny, wrinkled, and when he grabbed my finger so tightly I cried. I knew I had everything I needed, but happiness is fragile. When your foundation is still made of wounds that never healed, we used to believe love could fix everything. But the truth is, love isn't always enough. Not when old wounds are still bleeding, and neither of you knows how to heal. 3 years after Mason was born, things started to crack. Not in the dramatic, yelling like in the movies kind of way, but in the quiet, dull, draining kind. The kind that creeps in slowly, until all that's left are tired nods, shallow sighs, and silences that echo through a tiny apartment. I was working nonstop. Daytime as a technician at a software maintenance firm. Nighttime delivering for a food app. Some weeks I barely slept 20 hours. But I didn't feel tired. I felt like I was fighting. Fighting for my kid, fighting for our future, fighting for a dream. The problem was, I was fighting the wrong enemy. I didn't realize it, but I was still trying to beat my father, a man who hadn't been in my life for years. Every line of code, every delivery, every dollar saved. It was all just me screaming, "I'm not a failure. I'll succeed without you." But Natalie saw it before I did. One night, after Mason had fallen asleep, I was at my desk, eyes locked on the screen, fingers typing like a machine. Natalie stood behind me, silent for a long time. "Ethan, do you remember the color of my eyes?" I paused. Such a strange question, but I didn't turn around. Amber Brown. No, that's wrong. Her voice cracked, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not out of anger, but because she was exhausted. You're not here anymore, Ethan. You live in your head, in a war with a man who probably doesn't even know you still exist. And me? I'm lost, in a house that's supposed to be mine but feels like I don't belong. I finally turned around. Her eyes were red. Her face, the face of the woman who once meant everything to me, looked at me like I was a ghost. I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I love you, but I won't be invisible in your life. We divorced a month later. No shouting, no drama, just paperwork, quiet meetings with lawyers, and endless nights of aching silence. Natalie didn't fight for custody. She knew I would never let go of Mason, and maybe some part of her believed that I was the one who needed him most, so I wouldn't fall apart completely. The day she moved out, I held Mason at the door. He clung to her hand and asked, "Mommy, where are you going?" She leaned down, kissed his forehead, then looked at me. "I'm going to find myself again. You should too, Ethan. Not for your father, but for our son. He needs a father who lives in the present, not in revenge." After that, the apartment felt emptier than ever. It was just me and Mason, and the echoes of the past following us through every room. And then, one night, I watched Mason fall asleep on the couch, clutching an old comic book to his chest, and it hit me, hard and clear. I was becoming the very man I'd sworn I'd never turn into. And if I didn't stop now, Mason would grow up like me, alone, burdened, and never fully understanding why there was always something missing inside. After Natalie left, I fell into a silence that lasted almost a year. I didn't talk much, didn't smile much. I just existed, like a moving shadow, surviving out of duty. Every morning, I dropped Mason off at school, then threw myself into work. Every night, I waited until he fell asleep, then kept working, not for extra money, but so I wouldn't have to think. I didn't hate my father anymore, but I couldn't say I'd forgiven him either. All I felt was a bone-deep exhaustion from living under the weight of a past I couldn't shake. One night, while cleaning out the storage area behind the house, basically a tiny garage I used to dry clothes, I found my old college laptop, dust-covered, slow as hell. But when I plugged it in, the screen lit up. And for the first time in years, I sat down, not to manage deliveries, not to fix bills, but to learn. I started with beginner Python tutorials, then moved on to supply chain management, data processing, optimization algorithms for logistics. 3 to 4 hours a night, every night, alone. That little garage slowly turned into my night school. Walls lined with Post-it notes, a whiteboard propped up beside a tool shelf, covered in flowcharts and diagrams. I'll never forget the night I finished coding my first inventory tracker module. I hadn't slept in 2 days, but for the first time in forever, I didn't feel tired. I felt alive. Little by little, I turned that garage into my lab. I scoured clearance sales for old tech, used monitors, frayed cables, secondhand motherboards with no warranty. Everything was as cheap as possible. But piece by piece, I built my own testing system. My idea was simple: a logistics software platform for small and mid-sized businesses, a system to optimize inventory, cut waste, and automate tracking. I called it Driftline because I believed every moving part could be programmed to move smarter. I didn't tell anyone, didn't post about it, didn't seek investors. I had no fancy degree, no capital, no relevant background. I had one thing: persistence. Sometimes Mason would stand in the garage doorway watching me like I was some kind of alien. One night, he asked, "Dad, what are you making?" "I'm building something," I said. "Something that might make life a little easier for us down the line." "What is it?" "A machine so people won't have to stay up late. Like I do." Mason giggled. He didn't fully understand, but I could tell. He felt something. Belief. The belief that his dad was fighting. For him. I kept coding, kept studying business structure, taught myself the things college never taught me. How to pitch an idea, how to calculate EBITDA, how to build an MVP to win investor trust. And when Driftline was finally running its first beta, I stared at the screen and whispered to myself, "I'm ready, not for revenge, but to finally live right." 3 years after Driftline was born, in a damp little garage behind my old apartment, I got a call from Amanda Reese, an old classmate from our microeconomics course back in community college. I didn't expect her to remember me, but Amanda, now a well-known financial consultant in New York, said she'd come across Driftline on a logistics forum and sensed, in her words, real potential. "Ethan, I'll be straight with you," she said. "The kind of data Driftline analyzes, big construction companies would kill for that, but most of them don't even know where to begin. And you've practically built a tool that could save them millions." I went quiet for a few seconds. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with that kind of respect. "I'm not looking to sell," I replied. "Who said anything about selling?" Amanda laughed. "I'm talking investment. If you're looking to scale and expand, I've got a few angel investors who'd be very interested. We could try a small seed round." 3 weeks later, Driftline secured $1.2 million in seed funding. I didn't get a fancy office, didn't go on a hiring spree. I built a remote engineering team, partnered with small distributors struggling from broken supply chains. By the second year, Driftline had a steady cash flow. One of our early clients saw 300% growth just 9 months in, and then fate opened a familiar door. But this time, from the other side, Amanda sent me a file. Parker & Sons Construction, my father's company, once the pride of the southern region, now in serious trouble. 2 major construction projects in Baton Rouge and Tallahassee were hemorrhaging money. Vendors were suing for unpaid invoices. Internally, staff were quitting in waves, and the media had started covering their freefall. The reason? Poor supply chain management, massive inventory loss, refusal to adopt new tech. Ironic, isn't it? Amanda said. They're quietly shopping around for someone to buy a controlling stake. They don't want it public. It would humiliate them in front of shareholders. But if we go through intermediaries, we might be able to close quickly. I sat alone in the back room of my office, staring at a folder with my father's company logo on it. My eyes stopped on one line, Founder, Walter Parker. I used to think that when this moment came, I'd feel triumphant, but I didn't. I felt calm, strangely calm, like the universe had finally arranged the pieces where they were meant to be. I formed a shell company, Breakwater Capital, and began negotiations to acquire 42% of Parker & Sons through a series of private, off-record transactions. No name, no spotlight, just precision. 3 months later, I was the largest controlling shareholder of Parker & Sons. Me, the kid who was thrown out of that house with $237 in his pocket, now holding the fate of the company my father once swore I'd never be worthy of. I didn't tell anyone, didn't call my mom, didn't message my brother. I just waited. And then one April morning, I got a text from my mom's old number. "Dylan just got promoted. Your father's planning a big celebration in Miami Beach. Mr. Lawrence, the CEO, will be attending. Thought you should know. Not an invitation, just a reminder. I stared at the message, then smiled. This was the signal I'd been waiting on for 15 years. That night, when Mason and I stepped into the grand lobby of the Grand Astoria Hotel in Miami Beach, the air felt thick, almost heavy. Crystal chandeliers cast reflections on shimmering dresses and designer suits. Champagne flowed freely. Guests laughed and posed for flashing cameras. On stage, golden letters gleamed. "Congratulations, Dylan Parker, new regional vice president." A glowing declaration of power. Mason held my hand tightly. He wore a crisp white shirt I had ironed myself. I wore a plain gray suit with a dark blue tie. Nothing flashy, but respectful. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to keep a promise to my son, to stand tall without bowing. We hadn't taken more than 3 steps before my father saw me. He stood at the center of the room, surrounded by company execs and major partners. The moment his eyes landed on me, his smile vanished. In a blink, his expression shifted from proud to cold, cruel even. What the hell is he doing here? I heard him growl at my mom, his face flushed with rage. I don't know, she stammered, clutching her purse tighter. People nearby started to glance our way. I simply nodded politely, smiled faintly, and led Mason toward the dining area. We weren't seated at the large family table in the center of the ballroom, where the VIPs and top brass gathered. Instead, the hostess guided us to a 2-person table, right next to the kitchen door. Staff passed by constantly with trays and clattering silverware. A clear message: I was being politely erased. Mason tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, why are we sitting way back here? Feels really far from everyone." I leaned down and whispered, "This is a special table, the spy table. From here we can see everything, and no one even notices." He giggled, his eyes lighting up again. As long as he didn't feel out of place, I could take the rest. The party continued. My brother Dylan stood at the center of it all, surrounded by laughter, champagne toasts, and admiring glances. He looked radiant, confident, and perfectly bummy fake. Then came the speeches. My father took the mic. His voice echoed across the ballroom. "Tonight, I am incredibly proud of my youngest son, Dylan, a man who not only honors our family legacy, but pushes Parker and Sons into a bold, new era." He paused. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. "This is something not everyone could achieve," he said pointedly. "Some people, unfortunately, chase fantasies and drift away from reality." Soft laughter rippled across the room. I sat still. Mason furrowed his brows. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Then Dylan stepped up. He smiled like the lead actor in a soap opera. After thanking his wife, our parents, and the executive board, he turned toward me and gave me that familiar smirk. "I also want to thank my brother, Ethan, for showing up tonight. He's a reminder of something important. Not every path leads to success, and sometimes dreams built without a solid foundation are just that, cheap dreams." A few chuckles, a few sideways glances. I said nothing. Mason turned to me, his voice small, eyes wet. "Dad, is your dream really cheap?" That question cut deeper than anything my father or brother could ever say. I stood, pulled my chair back, my voice low, cracked from holding it in. "Let's go home, buddy." "But for real, Dad?" "Yeah, I don't think there's anything here worth seeing anymore." We began walking out of the ballroom. Eyes followed, whispers swirled. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. In that moment, I thought I had lost. I thought 15 years of fighting had led me right back to failure. But then, a deep, clear voice echoed from the front of the room. "Mr. Parker, I was hoping I'd see you tonight." And the entire room fell silent. I froze, still holding Mason's hand, just a few steps away from the exit. That voice didn't belong to anyone in my family. It wasn't a nosy guest, wasn't a hotel staffer. It was calm, precise, every syllable pronounced like it had been weighed and measured. It was the voice of Jonathan Lawrence, CEO of Lawrence Global, the new strategic partner of Parker & Sons. I turned around. He stood only a few feet away, wearing a charcoal-tailored suit, silver hair slicked back, eyes sharp like a blade, but without a hint of threat. "I was hoping I'd see you tonight, Mr. Parker," he repeated, this time slower, intentionally loud enough for the entire room to hear. Mason looked up at me. I felt his hand squeeze mine a little tighter, afraid, curious, both. No one moved, no one spoke. Even my father, the man who always bragged about his close ties to this CEO, stood frozen, like someone had cut the strings off a puppet. He stumbled forward, trying to wedge himself between me and Mr. Lawrence. "Mr. Lawrence, sorry for the confusion. This is Ethan, my eldest son. He's not what I mean is, he's not who you think he is." Jonathan didn't even glance at my father. Not once. "Not who I think?" He raised an eyebrow. "Walter, are you referring to Ethan Parker, founder of Driftline Technologies, majority shareholder of Parker & Sons, and the person who personally approved the Q3 logistics integration plan?" The room held its breath. Dylan went pale. My mother raised a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. I gently pulled Mason closer and stepped forward. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said, my voice strangely steady. "I didn't expect my name to come up tonight." "It should have," Jonathan nodded. "The integration model you and your team designed. It's a game changer. Our investment board reviewed it, and they're very impressed. But there are a few questions about the equipment upgrade budget. I thought we might speak directly." I glanced at Dylan and my father, both statues now, both cracking. I gave a small nod. "Our current model has an 18-month ROI. Initial costs are high, but we're projecting triple returns by year 2. If the board's still hesitant, I can present a parallel track with a leaner budget for pilot testing." Exactly what I'd expect from a real CEO. Jonathan smiled. "We'll continue the conversation at the upcoming strategy session." He turned, finally looking at Dylan, then at my father, the first time since the evening began. "Walter," he said quietly, "I always thought you knew how to recognize talent, but it seems you never realized who you had under your own roof. No anger, no lecture, just a single sentence." But for my father, it must have felt like a cold knife sliding through his decades of pride. I bowed slightly to Mr. Lawrence, then turned to Mason. "You see, son, sometimes you don't need to yell or prove anything to anyone. You just work quietly and wait for the right moment." Mason looked up at me, wide-eyed, glowing with awe. In that moment, I knew. The most important thing tonight wasn't the CEO's recognition, wasn't the takedown, wasn't the vindication. It was that look from my son. For the first time ever, Mason didn't just see me as the dad who keeps trying. He saw me as a man who had already made it. After Jonathan Lawrence spoke, the entire room sank into a stunned, heavy silence. No more music, no more clinking glasses, just one thing left hanging in the air. Silence. Dense. Suffocating. I stood there in the center of the Grand Astoria ballroom, no longer the disgraced son they once cast out, but a man who had just claimed his rightful seat on the board they tried to erase me from. My father stood motionless, mouth slightly open like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Dylan took a step back, face pale as paper, and my mother. She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing unevenly, as if she'd seen a ghost from the past. Except this ghost wore a suit and held power. Jonathan Lawrence nodded at me one last time, then walked away, leaving behind a sea of wide-eyed stares and barely contained panic. I didn't need a microphone. I simply stepped toward the stage, slow, steady, stopping under the same spotlight they'd used to mock me moments ago. I looked up, eyes scanning familiar faces, and the ones that had looked away for years, and I spoke, calm and clear. Maybe I should reintroduce myself. I'm Ethan Parker, founder of Driftline Technologies, and, as Mr. Lawrence just mentioned, the current controlling shareholder of Parker & Sons Construction. A ripple of gasps shot through the crowd. 6 months ago, through a series of blind trusts, my company acquired 42% of the firm. Pulling it back from the edge of bankruptcy, I kept my name out of it. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see, would my family still recognize me if I wasn't labeled a failure? I turned to my father, and it seems they didn't. His hands trembled, his face flushed deep red, but he said nothing. No excuses, no denials, just the silence of a man punched by truth. I looked at Dylan, the same brother who once called my dream cheap. Little brother, that VP title you're holding, that promotion, it went across my desk last week. You were promoted, I said evenly, because I believed you still had a chance to prove yourself. But maybe I was wrong. Dylan looked drained, like every drop of blood had left his body. You're lying, he stammered. This is my night. You don't have the right. No, Dylan, you're mistaken. This is my company now. And this party, I paused, scanning the room, is actually the first formal introduction between myself and the senior leadership I'll be restructuring. Then my eyes met my mother's. She wasn't angry anymore, just stunned, as if she were staring at a future she no longer had control over. You once told me, there are things that can't be changed, I said slowly, but you were wrong. Everything can change if you stand back up in the exact place you were knocked down. And finally, I looked down at Mason. My son stood just below the stage, staring up at me as if watching a superhero step out of a comic book. I stepped down, knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. Do you know why I never gave up, son? Because you wanted me to be proud, he asked softly. I smiled. Not just that. I wanted you to know your worth, even when the whole world turns its back on you. The room was no longer a celebration. It had become a reckoning, not of job titles, but of generations, of outdated pride based with meeting quiet truth. And I was standing in the eye of the storm. 3 days after the party, I received a handwritten letter from the family attorney's office, which was surprising. In an era of emails and e-signatures, the letter was written in my mother's shaky handwriting. No apology, no explanation, just a formal invitation. If you're still interested in your grandfather's inheritance, you may attend the official meeting for asset distribution per the terms of the old will. I wasn't surprised. They still thought I came back to take it all. Still believed power was the only prize worth chasing. They never understood. 3 days later, I sat across from both of my parents in a cold conference room at the law office. On the table, a thick folder listing all the assets I had once signed away at age 20. Real estate, trusts, inherited shares, a total net worth just under $14 million. My father sat hunched, eyes dull, face worn like a man who'd walked through an unexpected storm. My mother looked like someone who'd been torn out of a well-kept shell. No grace, no proud stare, just a tired woman clinging to the last pieces of a crumbling world. My attorney, Mr. Halston, slid a set of documents toward them. "This is the final agreement drafted by my client," he said. "He's already signed. Now it's your turn." My father opened the file, skimmed it, then froze. What is this?" he stammered. "That," I said calmly, "is the legal transfer of all inheritance rights from Ethan Parker to a newly formed nonprofit organization. I've named it Driftline for future builders, after the first project I ever coded in that old garage, and after my grandfather's spirit, to build but not legacy for its own sake, to build hope." My mother choked on her words. "You're giving it all away?" I nodded. "I once needed that money, more than anyone in this room, but I survived without it. And now I want other kids. Kids without powerful parents, without scholarships, without support, to have a shot at something I never did." "You don't want to keep any of it?" my father asked, still stunned. "The house? What's left of the estate?" I looked at him. "I don't need it, and I have no interest in becoming another version of you, holding power just to control others. What I want is for it to end with me, so Mason never has to grow up in a system where inheritance means more than character." The room fell silent, and for the first time, my father didn't look angry. He just looked old. His back seemed smaller, his eyes watery, not from emotion, but from the realization that everything he ever controlled no longer meant a thing. I stood, collected my documents. "This will be our last meeting. No more legal ties, no more obligations. I'm no longer the shadow in your perfect family portrait." I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, his voice, hoarse, rough, called after me. "Ethan, if your grandfather were still alive, he'd be proud." I paused, didn't turn around, just gave a small nod, subtle, like a final goodbye. 1 year after that fateful meeting, Mason and I moved to a small riverside town in Vermont, a place with maple forests, cobblestone streets, and, most importantly, a place where no one knew who I was. We lived in a simple 2-story wooden house. No gates, no staff, no security cameras, just a small garden out back, where Mason grew tomatoes and squash, and I built a long wooden table for us to sketch out homemade robot designs. Driftline was still running, stronger than ever, but I had stepped down as CEO, staying on only as senior technical advisor. I wanted time for Mason and for myself. In the mornings, I rode bikes with him to school. At lunch, I taught him how to make crispy chicken sandwiches, his favorite. And at night, we read books together, sometimes adventure stories, sometimes science books for kids. But every night ended the same way, with Mason asking, "Dad, what's the most important thing in the world?" Each time I gave him a different answer, but once I said nothing. I just pulled him close, held him tight, and let him feel the answer through the rhythm of my heartbeat. One October afternoon, I received the first handwritten letter from my mother. Just one line. "You don't have to forgive me, but I'm learning how to be a mother. Late, but real." I read it 5 times. Didn't cry. Didn't feel angry, just a lightness, like autumn wind. The kind of feeling I used to think only existed in fiction. I didn't write back, but I sent her a book about compassion and a photo, Mason and me sitting under a maple tree, smiling wide, holding a paper model of a spaceship. On Mason's 10th birthday, I asked, "What do you want this year?" He didn't even pause. "You. Just you here, Dad. That's enough." And in that moment, I understood something I'd never fully grasped before. Healing doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't come from revenge. It comes from small things. The look in someone's eyes. The feeling of being heard, being respected, being allowed to simply be yourself. I used to think success was being recognized. Now I know. Success is when you no longer need to be. I used to live my whole life trying to prove my worth to others. Now I live to teach Mason this. Your true worth isn't in how much you have. It's in how you live when you have nothing left to prove.